Hello, my name is Keegan Blizzard, and today for my presentation, I will be discussing should school be based on social experiences. This argument comes from section 1.1 of the Taking Sides textbook and discusses whether or not should schools be based on social experiences. In this presentation, I will show both sides of the argument, mostly focusing on that yes, I believe that in some way social experiences should be implemented into the current school curriculum. However, I will show examples from the other side of the argument. So what is social experience education? Social experience in education refers to the idea that students learn best in an alternative classroom environment that involves less textbook learning and focuses more on in-class participation. Essentially, this philosophy believes that students learn most effectively through experiences as they become more invested in what they are trying to learn. Its main goal is to teach students practical lessons they could use in everyday life, which is a part of a philosophy called pragmatism. Pragmatism is described by the International Journal of Creative Research Thoughts as an educational philosophy that says education should be teaching students the things that are practical for life and encourages them to grow into better people. This philosophy has also influenced other philosophies, such as constructionism, which also promotes student independence. So, social experience education essentially believes that the current system of education, which is primarily done through textbook learning and having the teacher being the only one to speak in class while the students take notes, is not a good way to engage students in what they're trying to learn. Many of them believe that how things are being taught and what is being taught is not really a practical way or essentially an effective way to help the students in later life, and that through making education a social experience rather than something they feel they have to do, it'll make it a more positive experience overall. So, the main goals of social experience. John Dewey, pictured here at the right, was the main force behind the movement for more experience-based education practices, as he was the one to pioneer the philosophy. The first main goal is to learn by doing experiments and activities instead of through conventional means of teaching, with full student participation. The second is to emphasize classroom discussion and democracy in the classroom. The third is to prepare students for life after education by making their classroom experiences fulfilling and applicable to the real world. So, John Dewey is a very famous educational philosopher who believed that, like as I previously stated, the conventional way of teaching students was just not very effective. He felt that there was a way to turn it into a more practical form of education by essentially making it feel less like a job or something that you reluctantly go to and make it more exciting or enlightening. Make it feel like an experience that helps you rather than something that confines you. John Dewey also believed the conventional way of teaching felt more authoritarian than it should be, having the teacher being the only one to speak in class when in reality it should feel more of like less of an obligation and more of a honor to be there in the classroom, more of something that you chose to do. Learning through action. John Dewey believed that for students to become invested in their education, their classrooms had to feel like an engaging experience for them to retain information more naturally. He proposed that teachers were to do more hands-on activities with their students, help them become engaged while also conducting experiments to encourage their intellectual capabilities. As PBS describes Dewey's method for education, when compared to former forms, unlike earlier models of teaching, which relied on authoritarianism and rote learning, progressive education asserted that students must be invested in what they were learning. So, John Dewey's form of education is often known today as progressive education, making the classroom feel more free and less more scripted, almost like a movie being turned into something more realistic. What I mean by this is it feels less that things are planned out and more naturally coming. So, let's say the students are naturally curious about something. Well, the teacher would help them conduct experiments and they make their own inferences on their findings, which I will discuss, which will bring discussions later on. Classroom democracy. Discussions in the classroom was the next logical step in a progressive classroom, as students should be able to discuss their experiences with each other. Dewey believed that these discussions would help students feel more independent, as now the knowledge they gained would be up to their own interpretation. So, naturally, as students would begin to do experiments, ask questions that they themselves are curious of, and have their own findings, they would all make their own personal inferences on what was going on. Many of the time, they would have differentiating opinions. So this would be a good way for them to not only build their communication skills, but also their democratic skills. John Dewey also believed that the educational system should help students become better citizens by implementing classroom democracy, creating a sense of community in this whole new experience-based curriculum. Preparation for life after education. Dewey's greatest desire was for education to become something that would prepare students for their lives after they graduated from school. There were plenty of responsibilities in the world after education that he felt that the classic system failed to prepare students for. Learning through experience and practicing classroom democracy, he felt would prepare students to become well-rounded, intelligent citizens who had the knowledge to face the responsibilities of life. The text from 1.1 describes the main purpose or objective is to prepare the young for future responsibilities and for success in life by means of acquisition of the organized bodies of information and prepared forms of skill which comprehend the material of instruction. So, the main argument that John Dewey had with the modern or the classic system of education, and that many still have with education, is that simply put, much of what they were learning was not very useful in the life after. He felt that if education became more experience based and had more free reign with the students, that naturally the students would ask questions that they knew they would need in their lives after. And thus, the main goal of an experienced education classroom would be met, that students would finally be learning the things that they would need to know to be a well rounded, intelligent citizen. Dewey's lasting legacy. John Dewey's legacy on education today can still be felt in many classrooms in the nation, as more students and teachers alike push for more experience-based curriculum. Many teachers in the modern era choose to use their control of the classroom to allow experimentation and discussion to take place in the classrooms. The roots of these activities can be traced back to the works of Dewey. As Very Well Mind describes, Dewey's influence as a pioneer in the field of pragmatism allowed future thinkers and researchers to delve deeper into how a person's experience is connected to their ability to gain knowledge. So, in the modern era, many of us have had teachers that we felt that did very well at their job, and usually you find that many of these teachers were the ones that did more experiments in class, who had more discussions. Personally, some of my favorite teachers were my English teachers because often we would read a piece of literature in class, and then instead of just telling us what the literature was about, we would have discussions where every student would discuss what they felt the literature was about, and the teacher would then join in on the discussion. This made the class not only feel more memorable, but made it feel more effective, allowing my own input being put in the class and made it feel more democratic rather than, as John Dewey would put, authoritarian. Opposition to experience-based education. While generally there are many educators who are both supporters and practicers of Dewey's educational philosophy, there are those who argue against implementing it to the fullest in their classrooms. Many believe that progressive classrooms would push out classic subjects from the classroom in favor of the more practical subjects explained previously. They feared that students will lose that academic knowledge that previous generations were already taught. The greatest fear many of who opposed the system had was the fear of the loss of power and authority of the teacher. If the classroom is left mostly to student interpretation, they feared that educators will become somewhat irrelevant as students are more independent. So, as I explained, this would be a very drastic change from the classical system of having the teacher being the leader of the class. and it would also change much of what was being taught. However, I would agree with John Dewey when stating that much of what some teachers decide to teach essentially does not matter later on in life, as more practical things can be taught, such as life skills such as taxes or what a mortgage is, or anything related to things that an adult would actually need to know. And as for this fear of the teacher losing control of the class, well, I would feel that an experience based education would be best effective in a high school or a college level classroom, in which students would be mature enough to know the importance of their education and would be able to work with the teacher rather than against to help progress the whole experience as a whole. So it would not only help with the maturity of the students, but it would also help them feel more involved in their education. Final statement. Even with its opposition, there is no denying that John Dewey's philosophy of combining everyday experiences with education has made improvements on the field of education overall. Teachers across the country have had the liberty of guiding classrooms to more experience based curriculum, allowing more freedom in what to teach and how to do it. Students in the modern classroom now have the ability to become far more involved in their education than the students that came before them, all thanks to John Dewey's system of experience based education. So, as I stated, I feel that John Dewey's system has been implemented in many ways, mostly due to the freedoms of the teacher. Of course, we ain't the days of the authoritarian type teacher isn't gone, but because teachers have more freedom, and many teachers these days would agree that John Dewey's system is very effective, they implement that in their classrooms. They can now decide how to teach students using experiments and helping it make it feel more overall a positive experience. Here are my sources, and that's it. Thank you for listening to my presentation.